What is up, Scyushi Squad? We are back again for more Trove, and you guys keep yelling at me about this. Every time I stream, you're just constantly asking me about a mods list video. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Now, I'm going to hopefully try my best to not only highlight all of the mods that I'm using, maybe give you guys a couple extra options here. But there is a couple things that I wanted to end up mentioning before we get started with today's video, namely that there are actually two versions of Trove on PC. You might not know about it, but you can actually download the Glyph launcher from the Trove website, or you could be playing the game through Steam. Now, I'm actually playing this game on the Glyph launcher because the Steam version of the game just doesn't run well for me. This can end up having the total opposite effect for some other people. There was a buddy of mine, Merc, from a long time ago, when he played Trove, it was the opposite. The Glyph launcher barely worked for him, so he was playing on Steam. Now, the reason why this is important is because the way that you end up installing mods is going to end up being completely different based on the version that you're running. If you're on Steam, it's super easy. You just end up going to the Steam workshop, and hopefully most of the mods that we end up talking about today are going to end up being on the Steam workshop, but it doesn't mean that all of them will be guaranteed. However, if you're using the Glyph launcher like myself, you're going to have to use the Trove tools or mod loader, whatever, which is from the Trove source website. I have a video talking about how to use the Trove tools. It might seem like super duper old, but generally speaking, I think that it's still going to end up being quite relevant in how I end up explaining things and how you do it. Now, the other meat and potatoes is I'm going to end up kind of cutting out the middleman for you guys, and I'm going to be sharing with you the mods that I think are optional, which is most of all just going to be visual mods and stuff, and then the mods that are going to end up being a lot more essential. So I'll try my best to end up having timestamps associated with each of those, and I guess without further ado, let's get into it. So I'm not going to end up necessarily looking at my mods through the in-game file right here, just because generally speaking, I'm going to be referring to my Trove tools mod pack or whatever, because generally speaking, this isn't actually going to end up including every single mod that I currently have. However, there's going to be some mods that you might not see. Like, you know, I'm not going to end up talking about this torch on my back because it's a custom mod that somebody made for me a long time ago and is nowhere uploaded as far as I know. Same with the dot cursor. I don't know if that's uploaded anywhere either. Like, these are mods that I had like from years ago that I just kind of kept around. So another thing I wanted to mention is that I'm not going to end up providing links to where you can get all of these mods because unfortunately, as I mentioned previously, there's actually two completely separate areas where you would end up downloading these, Steam Workshop or the Trove source website. It's kind of the best I can do, especially considering I've got a lot of mods and I don't think I could fit in my YouTube description. Now, just before we get started with the actual mod showcase, there's one feature that a lot of you guys misunderstand for a mod that I did want to end up covering in today's video, and I should, frankly speaking, probably just have a short video specifically highlighting it. But you'll notice that when I'm out in the world, I end up holding the pick up button, and that's going to end up basically vacuuming all the buttons that are nearby into my player inventory, right? But you'll notice that on my streams and other videos and stuff, I kind of pick and choose the items that I end up picking up. That's actually a native feature on both console and PC over in the miscellaneous tab, where you can have the minimum rarity for loot all, which I just have it set to shadow and up, meaning that when I end up holding the pick up button, I'll pick up shadow, radiant, stellar, and crystal gear, but I'll skip common, uncommon, rare, epic, and legendary. So well, and resplendent. But anyways, I wanted to be clear that that is an in-game feature that everybody can end up using. So you guys might have noticed this as a mod that I typically ended up having for years, which is going to end up being the customized VFX for Shadow, Radiant, Stellar by Novuhz. It also includes Crystal as well, and it's going to end up having these big streams of light associated with the specific rarity of the item, and it's basically going to just go up to Skybox. This is so that you can end up seeing it if the item is underground and you have to end up picking it up or anything like that. Another really handy mod, which most of all is for Leviathans and stuff, not so much Shadow Tower bosses, is going to end up being the Boss Health mod by StormReaper. So this is going to end up being a health bar that goes on the top of the screen, and it basically ends up showing the amount of damage that you're doing, the amount of damage everybody else is doing, your time, and so on and so forth. It's going to end up being an essential mod for boss fighting. Another essential mod is going to end up being the item per hour tracker, which you can see is going on in the bottom right of my screen right now. So it's literally showing showing which blocks I'm getting, how many of them I'm getting, and the more frequently I end up getting those items, the item per hour is going to end up increasing. So you can end up seeing that my the shapestone is increased to 30, so I could potentially end up getting 1374 per hour if I ended up farming 30 within the same amount of time frame that I ended up grinding those. So it's really good for just tracking drops and so on. Another mod is the customized VFX buffs for Arcane and Martial emblem. So quite literally, that's going to be the fire that you see on me right now. For Arcane, it would just end up being blue fire. It's more so an optional mod, but I really like it because I find that it's visually a lot easier to see whether or not I actually have Martial or Arcane active. So then there's also going to end up being the Super Hotbar by ExoDave and TheSymbol. I actually haven't been using this mod for a very long time just because I remember when I ended up going on the test server, it ended up messing some things up. So you might have noticed that my HUD has changed at random segments in the video as I ended up toggling this on, but essentially it cleans up the HUD a little bit, changes things up, and when we end up using one of our abilities, we get to quite literally see the cooldown of said ability, including our potions. And well, potions are basically instant unless we end up swapping classes and stuff, but my point is that it's going to end up being a big essential mod. Oh, okay, so scratch what I said earlier about my little dot icon, because somebody did end up re-uploading it. Sweet Xeon 3 made the clean dot crosshair. So somebody originally ended up making this clean dot crosshair, and then they ended up removing their mod or getting banned from the site, or I don't really know. So we ended up essentially having somebody re-upload it. So then there's also going to end up being ExoDave Better Invites, which is a pretty good mod, generally speaking. Invites are generally going to end up being quite annoying, at least for somebody like me. I just, not necessarily that I'm annoyed by you guys inviting me, it's just that I hate the fact that Trove still to this day has a big intrusive invite show up at the top of your screen instead of something that just appears on the side. That said, the ExoDave Better Invites mod is a really handy one that has a lot of quality of life improvements. So then there's also the Egg Finder mod by Novuhz, which is an old school mod that I obviously am not going to even show you guys what this looks like, but essentially it's going to be designed for the Geode caves specifically, because it's going to end up making the Geode eggs kind of have this very beautiful looking aura coming out of them, so that you can never end up missing those bronze eggs, those gold eggs and stuff like that. So then there's going to end up being the Superior Marketplace by ExoDave and TheSymbol, and this is going to end up being pretty much another big mandatory mod, because it'll allow you to search for more things at a time, which is really nice, but you'll also be able to sell a lot more things instead of having to scroll down, and then on top, well, you do gotta scroll down, but you'll be able to sell all your stuff, and then you can end up claiming all of your items at once, and it's just got some really nice quality of life stuff to it. So in the Sunrise update, when you end up dealing damage to enemies, they've actually changed it a little bit now, where if I'm not mistaken, for every 1,000 digit, there's going to end up being a little bit of a space between one number and the other. However, I'm just way too used to this other mod that we're going to be using, which is going to essentially end up adding the little periods in between. So that's going to end up being 1,000 Separators damage numbers by Mystic Lugia. Oh, another name that you might want to search for if that first option doesn't come up is Better Damage Numbers. Now there's also going to end up being the Superior Loot Collector Advanced. So there's actually two options for the Superior Loot Collector. They have one designed for people that are more early game and another one designed for people that are more late game, such as myself, where it is essentially going to end up automatically having a lot of items unlocked and automatically able to just collect all right away. Not to mention the interface is just so clean. Frankly speaking, I am so used to having this mod, I've had it for years, that I don't even remember what the normal loot collector looks like or the limitations that it has. A really nice visual mod that I use is the Dark Geode Caves by TFM Hisztike. I'm just gonna say TFM because I know I'm gonna pronounce her name wrong, but I've talked with TFM a lot. They're actually a really nice person and a great modder with some of the best mods I've seen, especially in terms of visual stuff. It basically just makes the Geode Caves a little bit more bearable and less hurtful on the eyes. Speaking of which, we got another one from TFM, which is going to be the Purple Empowered Gem Effects, which is, whoops, I can't, let me see if I can trigger it for you guys. There it is right there. So that's Pyrodist triggering, but it just ends up changing it to purple, which obviously is one of my favorite colors, so I like it a lot. There's also going to end up being a very obvious one that you've probably noticed in my streams and so on and so forth, which is Shadow Geode Surface by TFM. Now, unfortunately, you see all these gross red blocks and stuff? That's because these are a specific file type that can't actually be modified, to my understanding anyways. But the general you know, landscape itself and the colors and all of that stuff, that can end up being changed, which is why it ends up looking a lot less atrocious, because normally Geode Surface is going to end up being this bright red. There are other options, like other visual options. So there's like, you know, it can change it to a Dragonfire Peaks or a sand Geode Surface and stuff, and they all actually look great in their own respect. But generally speaking, the Shadow Geode Surface is going to end up being my favorite. So another mod that's pretty irrelevant nowadays, which is going to end up being Better Shadow Tower menu by Kentucky and TheSymbol. And I mean, as you can see, it definitely is a lot cleaner and fixes things up a little bit. But we're talking about the Shadow Tower, so unfortunately this is kind of irrelevant, but I did want to share it with you guys. Now, another big quality of life mod set that I gotta let you guys know about is TFM ended up going above and beyond with setting up Shadow UI for every single category, so you can have one set for your inventory specifically, so that it's not conflicting with, say, your collections tab or your character sheet. Now, obviously, I'm using the Shadow UI for the majority of these menus, but some stuff is a little bit out of date, so you might have noticed that, you know, other menus, like namely my character sheet, is going to end up being slightly different than the Shadow UI collection. But I wanted to let you guys know that the Shadow UI is basically going to end up covering every single category, including the class UI, which very neatly has all of the classes all set up as we've got the Solarian, no scrolling down or anything. Now, for the longest time, you guys know that we've actually been using the Orb Boss Finder mod to end up tracking a lot of the enemies within U10 and so on and so forth. But more recently, you guys have noticed something that looks a little bit like a Minecraft hack, which is going to end up being these lines coming out of my crosshair. So this is Chronicles Boss Radar, and it is quite literally one of the most essential mods that we're going to be talking about today, where it quite literally is going to be pointing from my crosshair towards the nearest boss, so long as I'm actually close by. So you can see the blue trails are going to end up being a cursed skull up there, a cursed skull down in this dungeon, and then the red is going to end up being this elite mob over here. But on top of all of that, it's also going to end up having the functionality of being able to track chests. So if I get rid of these guys, well, it went away really quickly, unfortunately, because I had my solar ability down. But essentially it's going to end up being a yellow line that'll end up pointing towards the nearest chest. So really handy, and ends up encompassing pretty much everything that any end gamer would ever need. There is an alternate version of this mod, I've heard, I haven't tried it yet, that does end up putting a little bit of a number display showing the distance from each of these objects to you. But for me personally, I'm usually about making my HUD look as clean as possible, so that's kind of one of the big reasons why I've shied away from it so far. A couple other quick mods that we're going to name in rapid succession here is by _future_hero_, where he has Penguin Party, Gummy Bears, Panda Party, and these are going to essentially change what some of the enemies look like in the overworld. And generally speaking, I picked them just because I felt that these enemies were a little bit more appropriate for each of their biomes. There's also going to end up being the Better Tome Reminder by ibot_11. So you guys have seen this plenty of times on my live streams, where essentially the tome will end up filling up, and then we end up getting a not as intrusive little reminder letting us know, hey, you know what, you got to change your tome, which is very nice, and it just goes into the top right corner rather than in the middle of our screen like the other tome reminder mods. Oh, and another one, you guys have noticed this many times, by TFM once again, is the Real Trove Experience loading screen, which ends up making the loading screen literally all of the different errors that you get on PC version of Trove, which is still one of my favorite mods, and I would say is essential, even though technically it's just optional. Another huge mod you guys have always been requesting is my Minimap mod, which is quite literally just called Minimap, one word, and that's going to be by TheSymbol and abbie, which this mod is absolutely crazy. It can be a little bit annoying though, because what essentially is going to happen is by default, you're going to end up pressing the V key, which you might remember that the V key normally is dedicated to bringing up that little menu in the top or bottom left that ends up showing like your claims and your character menu and stuff like that. It's basically the hotbar, right? But the point is that that is something that can be toggled, and so that's why they programmed it so that the minimap essentially ends up replacing that instead. However, a couple things end up happening as you have the minimap active. Your mouse wheel is no longer going to zoom your camera in and out. It's going to end up affecting the minimap, and because of the way that this is coded, you're not going to be able to type anything in the search section of here or the marketplace and stuff like that, because you're going to have to toggle the minimap off before you can end up regaining control. I don't know why, but I think it's just because the layer is constantly refreshing itself. Oh, right, and then not that I've been maining the Draco for a while, actually, but we've got Dracolyte Basic Attack Overhaul by your boy Chronicle Destroyer as well, and it basically changes it finally so that the base fire attack of the Draco is going to end up being the new fire video effects, because something that you guys may have noticed that I always criticize is that the fire on the Draco is still the old school fire from when I started playing Trove, despite the fact that a lot of the dragons have had new fire VFX added to them, and the Draco never ended up getting that upgrade, unfortunately. Another insanely useful mod is going to end up being the Auto Easy Happy UI, which ends up quite literally making our character sheet look like this, which is very, very clean and to the point. The main reason why myself and so many others ended up swapping to this is because a lot of mods ended up slowly becoming out of date as the Sunrise update came up, and they didn't end up having the crystal gem conversion items readily available, but this one does. It's by LiuLianF, and unfortunately it has a little bit of an annoying factor because every time I end up clicking off of the menu here, it goes back to my character sheet. I don't know why, but there's another really handy thing that it does have, which is being able to select the gem level that you want to end up forcing the gem to level into, so you can auto up or just stop it. And essentially what that's going to do is save you from having to mash the spacebar yourself. I don't know why I would ever end up wanting to use that, because generally speaking, when I'm leveling up my gems, I try to be very careful with what I end up changing on them and so on and so forth, but it's still really handy and cool to have. And another mod that actually got highlighted in my most recent video talking about how do you deal with 5-star dungeons was the 5-star next boss wave plus delve number. So this is going to end up being a mod that will end up affecting delves as well as the new 5-star dungeons that are in the Sunrise update. This is created by crispy underscore and is going to end up being one of those mods that is an essential one, because there's otherwise going to be no way of being able to tell when the boss wave is going to end up being, other than just memorizing the prime numbers and when the floors are for the bosses and so on and so forth. So this mod is really, really handy for kind of cutting that out of the way. Another one is going to end up being ExoDave Mod Manager, obviously created by ExoDave. This is actually not listed in my Trove tools, so I might have actually gotten this off Steam Workshop and just converted it over. I don't know, but either way, it just makes it a lot easier to manage the mods. And without further ado, I think we can call this video done, because that's all the mods that I end up using. So thank you all so much for watching. Really appreciate it and hope you enjoyed. Smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want to support the channel. Again, I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to provide links to every single one of these mods, but again, you can always just refer to the timestamp or the YouTube chapters, as they call them, to end up seeing the name of the mod, whether it's optional or essential, and what the modder, the creator, is going to end up being named as well. And then you can end up just checking on the Trovesaurus website or over on Steam Workshop whether it's there or not. I can't confirm about it all being on Steam Workshop because I'm, as I mentioned, using Trove tools. There's also some very, very slight visual mods that you might notice with some costumes and stuff, like this gunslinger, for example. What costume is that? That's actually old residue of some mods that I had installed improperly from years and years and years ago, and the solution would basically be me reinstalling Trove, which I haven't really had any reason to, so obviously I haven't bothered doing that, and so that's why you might notice some weird things here and there with costumes or visuals or whatever, but it's not necessarily mods that I'm going out of my way to use, and mods that I'm just choosing not to share with you guys. It's just quite literally leftover code. Anyways, hopefully you ended up enjoying today's video. Bye, guys.